This is Interpreting Wine host and founder Lawrence Francis, welcoming you to this, my Willamette Valley winemaker special. Across these 20 episodes recorded in quickfire fashion in January 2020, I got to meet a broad selection of people making wine in the region, both a variety of winemaking scale from the micro to the macro, and also different focuses that include different aging vessels, different grape varieties, sparkling wines, and of course different interpretations of Pinot. Episodes are going to be released in the order that they were recorded, so you'll get to be a virtual guest on the tour. 2 things you can do to help spread this series even further. One is to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, either where you're listening or on your favorite podcast platform. And the second, the one that's really going to help push this out there, is to head to interpretingwine.com/iTunes and leave a review letting me know what you think. A genuine, huge thank you in advance. Today's episode of the Willamette Valley Winemaker Special features Barbara Gross of Cooper Mountain Winery. True pioneers of winemaking in the region, Cooper Mountain Vineyards took root in the Willamette Valley 40 years ago and has been practicing biodynamic agriculture since 1999. Barbara, being in the second generation on the property, takes us through the winery origin story, talks to the reasons for becoming biodynamic in the first place, talks terroir and climate change, before an innovation versus classic wine tasting, 2 whites, and of course 2 very different Pinot Noirs. Enjoy.
I didn't find the world of wine. The world of wine found me. So Lawrence, you are actually sitting at the house that I came home to from the hospital. So the vineyard was actually planted before I arrived in this world. It was about 3 years old. And so I am one of the first of the second generations that actually came home to vines. And I got a whole 25 feet in this world. I did not get very far. I went away to university after high school, and then I came back with the classic story of not wanting anything to do with the winery at all, because I grew up in a very burgeoning industry. So as opposed to, what sounds incredibly pretentious today, but as opposed to the other schoolmates of mine going to Disneyland and taking those sort of really fun family vacations, we went to Burgundy. Well, when you're young, it is sort of this miserable experience of getting dragged along into all these cellars. And, my first active memory of drinking too much was when I was about 11 or 12 in their Trembach cellar. And so at that point we were really experimenting with Pinot Gris in the Willamette Valley. And so he was, as I like to say, the first Frenchman to get me a little buzzed up in his cellar. He was not the last. Spoiler alert. But typical American teenager who wanted nothing to do with any of this, because it was just a part of who I was, and it was a part of our family culture. We were sort of a burgeoning Willamette Valley wine family at that point. My parents were both physicians, and so this was legitimately a hobby that started in the garage that took away from the trips to Disneyland and took us into Europe instead. And so, it's the psychology of you go the opposite direction. And I did that classic psychology. So I came back from university, and then this is 2003, 2004. We were about 20 years and 2 decades in at Cooper Mountain. The industry was, maybe 3 decades in. At that point, you could still count on your fingers the wineries in the Willamette Valley, let alone the wineries in the Willamette Valley that had who had moved from their garage as we had to our horse barn, which you're sitting in right now. Converted horse barn. And, and, you know, had started exporting the wines and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a different world back then. Sort of where I think the first exponential growth that you can look at in the industry is sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. You see a lot of plantations happening. I guess you have the major publications starting to review the Willamette Valley at that point. So Parker, somebody's going to tell you a better date, but I think he starts in 93 or 94 is sort of the first time that Parker really reviews the Willamette Valley. So these are sort of key focal things that are happening to expand the region as a whole. And Cooper Mountain is sheerly here because the region grew. When I came on board, I did everything you weren't supposed to do. But the nice thing was back then there was very little competition and everybody was extremely collaborative. So I sort of got everything you weren't supposed to do out of the way really early on. Oh man, the mistakes that we made. And I mean, it was still, you know, you're still learning how to make wine. So Gilles, who is our current winemaker, came on board about 6 months before I graduated college. He came from by way of King Estate down in the South Willamette Valley, originally from Bordeaux. So, you know, if you can understand his personality just from a man from Bordeaux making Pinot Noir in Oregon, he has no character whatsoever. There is not a story there. No sense of humor. Yes, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it was just a different world back then. It was still the same culture. I mean, that's why we're still here, is that there's still the collaboration. There's still Pinot Noir. You still have second generation coming in. I mean, there's been more change in the Willamette Valley in the last 5 years than I've seen throughout my lifetime. But that's a whole different story that somebody else can tell you. We're the old guys. Yeah. So today, you're sitting on the original property that I grew up on. So we have the original Pinot Gris, original Pinot Noir, and then original Chardonnay. Sort of those original clones that are on, original rootstock, et cetera, et cetera. There's about 10 acres left up here. And then my folks in 1982 bought a 50-acre vineyard on the south side of Cooper Mountain, about a half a mile from where you're sitting. And that, again, is going to have some older, I'm doing air quotes here for the listener, older for New World is going to probably really be anything other than 30 years is how we sort of quantify in an anecdotal standpoint. If anybody's giving you anything else, then who knows? We have yet to define what old means, right? We're still really one generation in, sort of the beginning part of the second generation, which is really fantastic because we do have enough history with the vineyards at this point where we're understanding we should have never put the Chardonnay in there. We should have never put the Pinot Noir in there. You know, we put Chardonnay on Pinot sites and Pinot on Chardonnay sites, and it was all this original property that my folks had bought was simply because my mother grew up in Portland. She grew up riding horses, and the horse farm needed a buyer, so they bought it. There was not a lot of thought process that went into it. Today, when you're building a vineyard, there is a lot more thought process that goes in it. So it's sheer luck, and I'm incredibly fortunate that I sort of walked in at the right place at the right time, 100%. That's my story.
I love it. I love the story. As I just said to you, I think you're a total natural, as I'm sure the listeners can hear. So I'm sure, we'll pick up other strands of your story and the winery's evolution, having been born in the right place at the right time. We've since come outside to a spot that you've chosen to basically, I think, give myself, this being the first winery that I visited on this tour, and of course then the listener, a sort of a visual orientation first to Cooper Mountain, and I think you're going to also put Cooper Mountain and where we're standing in a wider context as well. So over to you.
All right, thank you. So yes, I chose this exact X marks the spot on purpose. Lawrence, we are going to be standing right now at one of the closer wineries into Portland. So technically the Willamette Valley is Portland. It's a massive generalization. Somebody else who's smarter than me can tell you the exact, but it's about 120 miles south of here. And then it straddles, if you will. You flew in and you might have seen what we'll call the Cascade Mountain Ranges. So on the east side of Portland, we have Mount Hood. Okay. And then we're, as the crow flies, about 60 miles from where you're standing to the Pacific Ocean. Mm-hmm. So that is sort of the way that you can visualize the Willamette Valley, is that you're going to be at the, I guess, northeastern tip, if you will, and your adventures are going to take you along this sort of route. It's a large valley. It's a very large valley. There's a lot of land still. So we are, the original vineyard and where you're standing is about 10 miles from downtown Portland. So we are actually, as I like to say, in the headquarters of Nike. World headquarters is about 3 miles down the road. So it's Nike and it's Cooper Mountain Vineyards. So it's really defining. So as sort of athletic apparel, and then after you get done working out, you can have some nice Oregon Pinot. I also wanted to take you and stand you out in front of our Vortex flow form. So as we are about, I guess the story is about 20 years in, my father, again, is a physician, and at that, in the early 90s, he goes back to school to get his degree in acupuncture and homeopathy. And at that time, he finds there's a man that he's studying named Heinemann. So Heinemann is sort of the grandfather of homeopathy. And then after Heinemann, in regards to Austrian and sort of German philosophy back in the 1920s, you have a man named Rudolf Steiner, who takes a lot of Heinemann's philosophies and applies it to agriculture. So this is about 92 that we decide that we're going to take our farms. At that point, we had 2 farms. So the vineyard on the south side of Cooper Mountain and then the farm you're standing on today, and convert it to Biodynamics. So we were certified organic in 1995 and then certified Biodynamic in 1999. So we are 2 decades in. At this point, in the United States, to put this in context for you, there is 2 or 3 wineries down in Northern California who are practicing, not a ton of education or understanding about what it meant or what it looked like. So we were able to bring on a consultant who was down in Northern California. His name is Alan York. Mr. Nicholas Jolie at the time was also a wonderful personality. And he was, selling wine in the United States. And so he would come out to Cooper Mountain. And actually, the first time Jolie came to Cooper Mountain, he dug up, this is still when we were conventional farmers. There was no life in the soil. So he made, I can't do it with this thing, but he made the Vitruvian Man. So he basically told my father, "You're forgetting your legs," talking about the soils and the root system. And my father, as a physician, noticed that he was making the Vitruvian Man, which is symbolic of balance in the medical world. So it became our emblem. So, the biodynamic program or sustainability or the buckets or environmentalism, whatever you want to call it these days, I've noticed have 3 different sort of reasons why you go there, right? So it's your wine origin story, but this is more your environmental or biodynamic story. Yeah. Within a story, for my father, it was definitely health. For Gilles, it's 100% terroir quality. And then for me, coming in as a second generation, it's more environmental. So we sort of have the three buckets, but 100% we started and we think of biodynamics like homeopathy or alternative medicine for the vineyards. So this flow form is where we, with all of the preparations before they go out to the vineyards, they get put into the flow form. This flow form was designed specifically to create the infinity. So if you can think about it like when you exercise, those preparations are not energized yet. So we're essentially, again, this is a terrible analogy, but it's an analogy. We're putting the preparations in and then it's releasing the endorphins associated with the energy cycles of those preparations. So they'll go in, depending on what the prep is, either very early in the morning or late at night, and get mixed up for about 3 to 4 hours. And then depending on which vineyard, we do own about 160 acres these days, scattered between 5 vineyards, which is not small anymore. All of our vineyards are going to be west of here. They're all within 15 miles, of this original site. So, we just bought our 5th vineyard last year, so that's actually starting its biodynamic conversion. We're about a year in, so we've got 2 more years to get that guy certified. The world of wine is tiny, which is, speaks to the community, which you're talking about the Willamette Valley, which is small, and then you're talking about the biodynamic community, which is small, and today, of course, our biodynamic programs we're growing. We don't want them to become formulaic, the biodiversity, et cetera, where we're now looking sort of beyond and seeing what else we can do. But it's been a fun ride. So older, this is going to be some Pinot Noir looking all gnarly. We haven't started the pre-pruning. We started pre-pruning at 2 of the other vineyards. We will get to this vineyard shortly. I would say probably within 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. This is a good classic example of what plantations looked like in the late 70s and early 80s in Oregon, or at least at my family's vineyard. This is Chardonnay, and this is Pinot Noir.
So in the same row.
Sure. We don't exactly sure what my parents were drinking when they planted. But they were definitely drinking something. My guess is some nice Burgundy. And so, you're going to see moss, which is, it rains a little bit in the Willamette Valley. So I just sort of, it's my visual of, moss covered Pinot Noir vines. Is that old gnarly thing that happens?
First of all, I'm totally loving these descriptions that you're giving. I think this is, really the fundamentals of really why you're doing it. I love talking to the 3 buckets. I love the way that you came up, and you kind of early on talking about Burgundy, and I just wonder. I mean, it was interesting you saying here this visual of the vineyard and the sort of the misplanting or the mixed planting, whatever we want to call it. I actually haven't been to Burgundy, interestingly, even though it's obviously a lot closer for me than here. But I got to the Willamette Valley before I got to Burgundy.
Sure.
So I exactly, yeah. I'm open to offers. So I just wonder, I mean, if you, it feels like you would have that visual of Burgundy and how Burgundy might look in your mind, and I just wonder if, again, potentially for some of my listeners who have been to Burgundy and haven't been here, the reverse of me now, maybe, try to sort of make some kind of visual connection and any other connections that you would choose to make.
Yeah. As my French winemaker says, this is early pruning style. not a lot of vineyards look like this anymore. So right away you're looking at spacing, right? And you're looking at vineyards that were made for John Deere tractors. You're looking at sort of these older, which was beautiful at the time, but like my new vineyard and most of the vineyards that are going in are going to have much higher densities associated with them. So obviously Charleston's going to be a little less high, I would say, as a massive generalization. This again, I mean, you're in a biodynamic vineyard, so this is very wild. Everything that we do sort of looks a little wild. We're definitely trying to minimize tilling. Trying to let, the under row go as wild as we possibly can. We're coming off a little bit of a tricky vintage in the Willamette Valley. Climate change has certainly been kind to Oregon, generally speaking. 2014, 15, 16 were our drought years. Who knew we could get so much Pinot Noir off of these vines? The disease pressure was extremely minimal. The wines are a little bit more lush, but they're definitely very friendly in their youth, and consumers, generally speaking, are enjoying them. 2017 was a little bit more classic. 2018, again, is going to be a little bit more concentrated. And then 2019 is a little bit of a classic. It rained. But the wines are beautiful, and, really what I think the Willamette Valley offers is the warmer it gets, unfortunately, what we find is the less nuances that you're seeing within the wines and the less terroir. They all start to taste a little similar. So, we're having conversations about what it looks like to slow down vineyards, whereas during the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, it was just about ripening fruit. So your paradigms are definitely changing. So my guess is you're not going to necessarily see the visual you're seeing here a lot. These are sort of these old heritage vineyards. And that's probably the biggest difference you're gonna see again. And you're probably not going to see a ton of Chardonnay. That was really more, I don't think they did that on purpose, was the point. They just didn't know what they were doing back then. So there's just a little bit more professionalism associated with row orientation, developing vineyards, soil testing, et cetera, et cetera. That's a massive generalization if anybody really wants to call me out on that.
One of the things I've tried to do before I've come here actually is post on Instagram, let people know I'm coming here, and actually draw out any questions that people might have. And I had a question in the last couple of days, which was really I felt was really speaking to really kind of terroir and exploration of terroir.
Sure.
And whereas I guess again, sort of the big generalization, of course, with new plots coming online, is that in Burgundy, they know their terroir. They've had hundreds and hundreds of years to kind of become familiar with their terroir and what that's showing them, and the best way to kind of interact with that. And I just wonder, really, in whatever way sort of makes sense for you. Yeah, give us your and I think as well, it sounds like it's going to be very interesting because you've got this new vineyard. Mm-hmm. So you've got vineyards that have come online at various different times, and how do you kind of go about discovering the terroir of that fifth vineyard, and how do you kind of getting to know it?
Sure.
I think that would be a really interesting window into that approach in your winery.
Wow, it's a really fabulous question. And I think today you're going to, even if whoever you talk to, whenever they jump in, I think that's why we're in Oregon. I think that's why people are migrating to Oregon, is that we're still writing the book and we're still understanding terroir. Like, a classic example is we really only have one generation in on what we should be planting, where we should be planting it, how we should be planting it. And now we have, unfortunately, climate change changing all of those variables once again for us. The only thing that I can offer you in the Willamette Valley is evolution and change. Yeah. And I definitely think that that's where, generally speaking, the consistency of the wines and the quality of the wines and how we deal with the change gets better and better. I keep having this conversation over and over again, is what we just saw with that challenging vintage in 2019. Had we had that arguably in the 80s and the 90s, the wines would have tasted so much differently. We now understand our terroir a little bit more. We understand how our vines respond to different climatic events that occur. And the wines are absolutely gorgeous. They were a little bit of that powerful, shocking thing that happens where you get a little bit of affirmation of, great, arguably a winemaker has 30 to 40 years or tries to get it right, and that's it. And that's sort of your legacy associated with it. And luckily, those challenges no longer really affect vintage and quality like they used to affect vintage and quality. So it's an exciting time. I mean, every year, the Willamette Valley discovers more about its terroir, understands more about making wine. And the wines, I think, clearly show, where if you would do a massive tasting of Willamette, this is going to sound, somebody will get mad at me about this, but in the 90s, the differentiation about quality across the valley was very clear. You would sort of walk into a tasting and there would be just a large cross-section of quality associated with the wines, where the band is getting much smaller. And I think what the challenge will be for the next 50 or 60 years is that, generally speaking, we are still, unfortunately, positioned, for better or for worse, a little bit below Burgundy, which is fair. And we're trying to really find the terroir, I believe, and push those barriers into higher and higher quality. But, I mean, think about it. Like you just said, we have 50 years at most. Yeah. And the wine industry is extremely slow. I have brothers and sisters who are not interested in the wine industry because it is so incredibly slow. And it's always evolving and changing. So, I hope everybody will join us on this wild ride and we can talk about the answer to that in 10 years. It won't even be an answer. We'll have just more questions, really.
We've come back into the horse barn now, back into the warmth. And I've been mean and I've made you choose only 4 of the 7 or so wines that you'd set up here. And I think, what I've asked you to do is, kind of tell the story and the point in its evolution that Cooper Mountain finds itself right today in the story through these 4 wines that we're going to taste. So, over to you. And along with that, obviously, saying why you've chosen them and what they show to me and to the listener about the winery.
All right. I'm going to really throw you for a loop in regards to a roller coaster, and we're going to thread sort of innovation versus classic. Keep in mind that the innovation wines, the 2 wines that probably are what we are most known for in regards to innovation, are very small case production and sort of more experiments. So I'm starting you with a 2018 Tocai Friulano, or Sauvignon Vert. In the United States, the registry doesn't necessarily recognize Sauvignon Vert. It was registered as Tocai Friulano, so that's what we call it, even though that is very illegal in the European Union. We're just going to ignore that. There are no laws in the wild, wild west, guys. So we put this in 2004. We have about 3.5 acres of the wine. It's nice and bright and it's fresh. It's just a little different. And it hasn't ripened in 2 of the vintages. So consistency wise, it's definitely still one of the more innovative wines just to get to ripen at this point. And it is going to be grown at our Chehalem Mountain Vineyard. So we own 2 Chehalem Mountain Vineyards out of the 5. The other 3 will just be Willamette Valley appellated. So you're going to hear a lot about this, and I'm not the one to tell the story. We'll let somebody else tell the story about the sub-AVAs that are coming in. I guess the takeaway that you should have with me when I started is it's a very large valley. And over the years, we have found that there are areas that do better with the grapes than other areas, or different. Better's not the right word, different. So yes, so you can already taste it's New World. I mean, I think that that's the fun thing about the Willamette Valley is we're almost the gateway drug. That we're not, if you want to do, we're the gateway drug. So we sort of straddle both old world and new world philosophies. We straddle stylistically, culturally. When you show up to the Willamette Valley in 2020, I think that that's your takeaway is you sort of have this thread of both tradition and innovation, across the board. And I think that that will be so interesting. And I don't have an answer for you is what this looks like in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. Yeah. If it continues to sort of thread those dots and that sort of journey. So if we just did what I'll classify a little bit more as, I suppose, innovation, or different or quirky, however you want to sort of use that adjective. We are now going to go into more classic and traditional. So this is the original Chardonnay clone. So what we'll call the 108 Davis clone. We did graft over into Dijon clones, which somebody else is going to tell you that story with Chardonnay. We grafted over everywhere except for 1.5 acres, which on the vineyard, because it was the only place we could get it to ripen. You know, at this point, the vines are 40 years and some change. And so you definitely get, we call it the Cooper Mountain clone. It is no longer. We have a little hyper obsession with clones in the Willamette Valley. You can hear that a lot. I think as we get older and we're going to sort of move away from our hyper obsession with clones and more into a little bit more hyper obsession with soils. So Cooper Mountain has always been, because of obviously organic and biodynamic, a little bit more concerned with soils than clones. That is a debate that we can talk about in the future. But again, you have minimal oak, minimal malolactic. So you have pretty serious Chardonnay, cool climate Chardonnay. Yeah, right. Yep. So that is can you see why I chose those two?
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah. Just 100%, because the difference, obviously there's a great difference here. But yeah, the stylistic, just the energy, the impression, and I'm 30 seconds to a minute on from tasting the Chardonnay, and I'm still getting this lovely minerally, real depth of flavor. I would say I mean we've kind of been through the sort of ABC, anything but Chardonnay, in England, and I'm sure in lots of parts of the world, and I know that cool climate Chardonnay is really, it's becoming a lot more popular, and I think with good reason. I mean, and this is, there's a lot more depth here than a younger Chardonnay might give you, but I like it that this isn't overdone. I mean, I think again, similarly to a Chardonnay I had last night, it wasn't turned right up. I don't think they had any malolactic. This that you said had a touch of malolactic, a touch of oak. It's again, I think these two wines again, play to that. Almost like the tension, really, the tension between the new and the old, between the something funky and small batch and Chardonnay and a real interesting insight, into the portfolio really, and which is what I guess where people will meet you out in the world.
Exactly. So I'm going to start you just with a 2017 Pinot. This is going to come from the vines. This is a single vineyard Pinot Noir program that we have from the south side of the hill. It's a little bit lower elevation than where you're sitting, which is about 600 feet. This is about 700. I'm sorry, this is about 300. It's sort of classic volcanic soils, sort of a subset of all of the volcanic soils. So the vines are pushing about 40 years at this point, and to me, this is just pure Oregon Pinot in a vintage that is going to take some time to truly evolve. If somebody were to ask me, it's not ready, it needs time, it's still tight, it's still moody, long and linear, and then I'm going to finish you with something a little bit more innovative. So I just didn't want to wreck your palate. I mean, it definitely it's fresh fruit. Like, that's the thing that sort of stands out to me when I think about Oregon Pinot, is sort of fresh fruit. And on the really spectacular sites, on the spectacular vintages, you get, of course, the mushroom and the savory and the mineral and the secondary. In these sort of warmer vintages, I think that becomes more challenging to find, right? Because you're sort of racing the sugar and the phenolics. Pick dates become so much more important. We're really, that is I guess the blessing and the curse of climate change, where 100% vineyards were built to ripen in the last 50 years. We just wanted them to ripen before the rains came. And the next 50 years will be about slowing down vineyards. That's it in a nutshell. So the questions now, we now have a whole new set of questions to ask and to learn across the board. I'm not of the camp yet where I think we should be giving up on Pinot Noir and moving into other varietals. And I think that there's going to be bits and pieces of that pocket, but I still think it will probably be at the end of my generation, that those conversations where you're just now building your vineyard, we still have the tools to build the vineyards to slow them down to a certain extent. So then this last wine, we're now threading back into innovation. We started this program back in 2002. So we're about 18 years in to, the question that my father and winemaker Gilles sort of asked is what it is about the addition of sulfites. We still have a lot of questions and enology about sulfites, right? So this was 100% just a health-driven decision. I'm not fanatical one way or another. Obviously 99.5% of our wines do have minimal amount of sulfites added to them. This is the one wine that we do not. The first few vintages of this wine, we did, what the world taught us to do, and that is be afraid of oxygen, so it was put in plastic vats during fermentation, and oak chips were added, and it was legitimately the worst wine we have ever made. It's a shame because it came from really good fruit. I mean, and it oxidized, and it was crap. So again, this was sort of an experiment that we started very early on, with sort of a small amount of fruit. And then in 2004, 2005, we started asking the questions that any biodynamic grape grower is going to ask. And okay, so if we can't really solve it in the cellar, where can we look to the vineyards to find some antioxidants? So we started working on some canopy management techniques and some specific blocks that would essentially give us some really great, what we've identified as caffeic acid in one of those phenolic. So we basically farm for caffeic acid. We no longer harvest based on sugar levels. We're just basically harvesting these blocks on phenols. We put them in the cellar. We don't sulfur them. We raise the temperature. We essentially try to create all of the issues that you would run into, just like sort of the biodynamic world where you're trying to naturally train your vines to fend off diseases and create like homeopathy and acupuncture, et cetera, et cetera. When we do have some issues with barrels, we sulfur them and we add them to the different blends. And at the end of the vintage, what's left gets put into bottle. And this is life. And it's called our Life Pinot Noir. So it's been a almost 2-decade experiment for us as we've moved in. And now, of course, it's a hot topic. I don't think any winemaker necessarily wants to sulfur their wines. Like, it's a bleach, it strips color, it's just a necessary mandate of winemaking to the most part. Maybe we over sulfured wines, but as a whole, I feel like conventional, non-conventional winemakers don't want to strip the fruit. It's like almost a filter, right? So I think winemakers get a bad rep, generally speaking, and I'm a organic, biodynamic, no sulfur added. It's something that we need in winemaking, that's for sure. And until we have a better solution, these wines are almost a leap of faith. These Life Pinot Noir programs, you can tell that they're massively different stylistically. So where this is my classic Oregon Pinot, this has lots of fruit. It's pure. It's almost like a Gamay Beaujolais style pure Pinot Noir, which is, so we market and sell it based on sort of taste as opposed to all of the philosophy behind it. And what you can do when you're 20 years in and you're a little bit more comfortable and everything. It's fun. And that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, I love that description. And I just think, again, you're a total natural, because I think just, give you the mic and, show you what I want you to talk to here with these 4 wines, and you've absolutely nailed that. And I think the thing that I would add here is my personal experience of tasting these wines, and actually something pretty unique just happened, really. Just in tasting this Life, I kind of just got carried away, and I didn't. I mean, I didn't really want to spit it out, but I did because I'm driving. But I could still have been swooshing that. I think it's just there's just not. It's not a challenge. There's nothing heavy there. There's nothing sort of taking away anything from my experience there. It's adding to that. And I think nailed the description, but I think also nailed the name and the idea behind that. And I'm sure that the interesting thing as well is that the two are so differently. So they're siblings, or that they can sort of sit on the shelf beside one another with the same brand and the same Cooper Mountain Vineyards written on the label, but you're going to probably drink them at quite different times.
We really only have 20 years with this program, and as I mentioned before, the early renditions of Life were literally, I cannot say this again, the worst wines we've ever made. And I apologize if anybody has them. Come actually find me and I'll give you some of the current vintages. Anyhow, we started opening up this year to see how the 2006s and 7s and 8s and 9s and 10s were aging in life. And I honestly didn't think they would. I basically give them about a 5-year run just from a safety perspective. They were beautiful. I mean, they were absolutely stunning, and they took on characteristics of more of a classic Oregon Pinot Noir. So all of that fruit and energy and sort of purity start to polish, and you get more of, the Grace Kelly Pinot Noir versus, I don't know, the Courtney Love style, the energy, the life, the vivacious, which is super interesting. Like that was a leap of faith for us. We did not think that was going to happen, but it did. So this is the point, is that you continually ask the questions, right? So if we're in winemaking to find answers, you're in the wrong profession. The only thing the answer is going to give you is a new question. And that's where we're at in Oregon.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It was an absolute pleasure starting my tour of the Willamette Valley with yourself. Do please see below for all the details of the wines that we tasted and the Cooper Mountain website. Also worth pointing out, if you're in the UK, that Cooper Mountain Vineyards is without representation in the UK and is seeking to bring these wines over. From Cooper Mountain Vineyards, I continued my journey in the Willamette Valley at Raptor Ridge Winery, and I pick up with Scott Shull in episode 382 next time. Please do spread the word about this Willamette Valley takeover taking place over these 20 episodes. And if you know somebody who loves Willamette Valley wine, do encourage them to subscribe now at interpretingwine.com/listen so they're alerted whenever new episodes will go live. And if you're not already, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.